All right, so in this lesson, I actually just had my computer come back to life from being frozen, which would have been great to show you. But we are going to learn a little bit about how to do a pre-comp and what a pre-comp even is. So the files we've been working in so far, and pretty much all semester here, are very small. Like this may seem like a whole bunch of stuff to y'all. This is not really. Uh, this is more of a large comp. So if you look on the Moodle under the pre-comping section here that you're probably on, I have some examples that I found online of some fairly big scripts. So, I mean, I worked in feature animation for a long, long time, and I can tell you that this is this is not a very well set up script, but this is not a very huge shot. This is probably an averagey, okay-ish size shot with not a crazy ton of stuff going on. So they can get pretty big and pretty complicated. And when you get to stuff like this, when you're trying to view even parts of the comp, like even something really small, with not a lot going on, when you hit that play button to like cash up your shot in the viewer, it just kind of like tick, tick, tick. Like I've had it take minutes, 10 minutes or so at a time before it'll go from frame to frame. And sometimes it just is what it is. But as a compositor, we try to do everything we can to keep our files light and fast. So one way to do that is with a thing called a pre-comp. So these are comps. A pre-comp is a comp that goes before that comp, obviously. So this little thingy up here I have is just an example of a pre-comp. So, and the reason I have this whole thing X'd out is very intentional. So I won't undo this right now just because I don't want it to go so slow on this video, but this node is called Flare Factory. It is in this flares and glow nodes script that is in the assets folder for the iGlow project on OneDrive. But this node is, I might open in here. Aha! A really cool node. It does really neat lens flares. And I will maybe do a video on how to do that. But it's super cool, super, super customizable, used in pretty much probably every single movie you have seen in the last couple decades. But what is a problem with it, if I open it up, is this is actually what's under the hood. That is a big script. That is a lot of stuff going on, and not all this stuff is happening at once, but all these nodes are getting loaded into your shots. That is a lot of stuff. So it makes your shots go really slow. It is a really good way to crash your scene, but it does some really cool stuff. So this is a good example of a heavy node. It's very uncommon to run into too many things like this. There are plenty of special cases, but for something like this, if you want to use it, it looks really cool. It'd be really fun to use this node because I could do super cool things and make lens flares with like fun little bits and pieces and all the cool like lens flary things that happen in the sky. So you can do really cool stuff with it. And sometimes when you have a sun or something weird happening, you want to be able to do some cool effects. So sometimes you need to use something like this, but it's a heavy node. So if every time I wanted to play through my shot, I had to try and let this thing load, everything would just chug. It would not be workable, like completely. In a real shot, this would not be workable. In y'all's little shots here, these will not be workable because it's just so heavy. So how do you work around that? Well, there's a couple ways, but the main way that you see people run into it is with a pre-comp. So for pre-comps, you see I have two of those little flare factors in here, one for each eye. This was from our little eye glow example shot that I have. If you go to the start of it and play, you can see a big pretty flare with little bits and pieces and all the gooey stuff and things that come with the flare comes on. But I wanted that flare in there on each eye, but I was no way I was gonna be able to take these flare factory nodes and hook them in. They're way too heavy. So again, I'm probably gonna do a little video on flare factory if anybody wants to see how to put flares on. But in this case, for this shot, I had tracked my footage. I had tracked her pupils of the tracker. So I knew right where the center of her eyes was, which is where I'd want my flares to be. So I copied those out and put that information in these parts of these flares. And I was able to make the flare that I wanted. And once I got those flares, They essentially tracked for the length of the shot, which is great, but it's so heavy. So that's where a pre-comp comes in. So I have a chunk of my shot that's super, super busy. I want to render it out ahead of time so that I can just kind of get rid of this stuff. And by get rid of it, I just mean disable it. Disabling it basically makes it invisible in the shot. It doesn't count it when it's trying to process everything that it's loading in here. It's figuring in for all the things that are not disabled. It kind of skips past the stuff that is. So it usually shouldn't cause you problems if you leave things disabled. So I want to use this and then disable it as fast as possible. That way it makes my life easier. So if I have this thing animated exactly the way that I want it to be, which in this case, I'll show you, but I didn't render the whole thing because I actually had a full version of this, but I deleted it. So it just took me 20 minutes just to try and render these couple frames, but it'll prove my point on what I'm trying to show you. So this is like a chunk of what that tool is doing. It looks pretty cool, but these are flares. So, like I said, this took me to render this little bit out as a pre-comp, which that's what you're looking at here. It took me probably about 25 minutes to render about 25 frames, about a minute a frame. It's pretty brutal. So in the world of rendering comps and things, it's really not that bad. But for a pre-comp, that's pretty heavy. So I don't want to have to do that on top of everything else I'm doing every time I use my shot. So the beauty of a pre-comp is I was able to render this bit out, disable it, so now my comp works nice and fast the way I want it to. And then at the point in the comp where I would want to apply that footage, so like say right here, go to frame it, you can actually see it, where I'd want to apply it, instead of taking these mega heavy nodes, instead of having this whole setup down here and hooked in, I'm not even going to do it, but like hooked in like right here, that would be the exact same thing as doing this. Because right here, so seriously, like imagine like if I hook this in, which I'm not going to do, I mean, these are disabled, so it shouldn't do anything, but I don't want to mess it up for the sake of this video. But if I hook this in here, is literally the exact same thing as hooking it in what the right node is seeing if I'm making this little right node, which is looking at, like this is the same output of this right node. You see, I just called it precomp. So in that case, once I've rendered this bit, I can disable all of this, pull in this as a read. So the output that this is saving here, I can literally like copy this whole text and paste. And if you actually go, it'll error out, but if you go open up the folder, you can see, let's see, it just rendered those frames. And click it, and then you'll have your frames. See? So, but I already have a copy of this in here. So this is essentially the exact same as this. Same. But we can do this because now this, you can see how fast I'm able to play it in here. This plays super fast. It's super light and easy to work with. That's the beauty of a pre-comp. And what we're doing in this class, you probably won't need to use this too much unless you want to do like these flares. We have some other projects coming up that if you find you like faster feedback of being able to play back your shot a lot more often, you might benefit from pre-comping some stuff. So just having this in your back pocket that this is something you can always do is really, really helpful. The time you want to do this though is once you've figured, like, you've locked in how you want a part of whatever you're trying to pre-comp, you're locked in on that. You don't need to make any more changes to that. So like I wouldn't want to render these flares out until I designed them and checked them, and that means actually like real slow and like letting it load, clicking through a handful of different frames and making sure it looks like what I want it to look like before I commit to rendering it out and pulling it in as pre-comp. Because at this point, any changes I make, it's not going to pick up because it's not, I'd have to re-render this guy. So something to keep in mind. In this case though, I'm able, this plays back pretty fast in the shot right now. And see, it wasn't the full range that I had, but you can see the part that did. But up till about frame 72, that looks pretty good. So I'm able to add that flare on top of there and all the little good bits and pieces and stuff that comes with it without having to fight through these nodes. So that's the beauty of a pre-comp. And really the way that you do it is the same way that you make a write node. at the bottom of whatever the heavy stuff is that you're dealing with. I've done them in plenty of projects where I've even done stuff like this where if say this is your heavy stuff up here that you're trying to finish out, and you know really the stuff you still have to make changes to is all the stuff down below. You could literally make a right node wherever you want in your comp and hook it in because it's not messing with it. It's just off to the side doing its own thing. You would give it a location and a name. So usually the way I like to do stuff is to make a folder, which you can do it up here with this little folder button, and say precomp, wherever you're planning to put your renders. So just kind of pick a location, make a folder or something, and say like, here's where my final renders are going to go. You can make a little folder called precomp, and that'll be what where these frames are going to go. Because in reality, we don't render movies or MP4s or anything like that in Nuke. Most people, most compositors will always work with image sequences. That's what I'm going to do here. See, these are image sequences. See how this comes up as pound, 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 PNG, and it gives you these numbers. If you uncheck this sequences button, you can see it's all these frames. But it sees that it's numerical, so if the sequence button's on, it'll show you the full frame range. So, but in this case, I want to save this. I could save this as like pre-comp, and then the proper nomenclature for how to render out an image sequence is going to be dot, period, and then pound signs. Pound sign is the little hashtag looking one. So you put 4 of those. That's frame padding. So it's basically going to say on frame 1, it would be 0001. On frame 100, it would be 0100. On frame 25, it'd be 0025. So it just matches whatever frame it is. And the reason you have 4 of them is that's just kind of the commonly accepted, like, stuff's not going to really be much longer than that. You're not going to typically have more than 999,999 frames of stuff. So it'd be the dot 4 pound signs, then dot PNG. If you do it like this is the proper way for Nuke to know we're saving an image sequence. And even when you say OK, it'll change to PNG. It'll save your image sequence. One thing to be mindful of with a pre-comp. Pre-comps are often not full background images, full everything. Like in the case of the one that I rendered, it could have an alpha. So if you do have an alpha on something, like if it's just a character or just a component of something you want to have an alpha, like that mask, so you can cut it out of stuff, you can want to remember to check on this. Make sure you check on the RGBA or RGBA for alpha. It'll render out your alpha channel as well. But then at that point, you would just click render your frame range. And whenever that is done, typically the way I like to do it is to just disable it. I'll come in and do like I did before, steal that, paste it in the shot. Make sure I got the actual frames. So this is pretending, if I had rendered this out. But then at this point, I could then do this. And then this is essentially saying right at this point in time, like this was the end of the line for the train. This ended. I rendered this. The next node in the line is this. I'm just putting it over here so it's nice and out of the way. It's disabled. And then picking up right where it left off, this is exactly the same thing. And now we're going to keep on going down the line. So that is the beauty of a pre-comp. It keeps things light. It keeps things quick and easy to work with. And it keeps you from having to struggle through really slow nodes.